welcome to today's webinar on supply chain sustainability in times of Omnibus. At the end of February, the Omnibus Package was announced by the European Commission, leading to some shifts in timelines and scopes for the flagship supply chain sustainability regulations like the CSDDD and the CSRD. And today's webinar is really all about reflecting on what that means for companies in practice, companies like Yanfeng that have been working on sustainability within the supply chain for several years. And to deep dive and discuss these changes, I'm joined today by Gunnar Büchter, Global Head of Sustainability at Yanfeng, long-standing customer of Prewave. And Gunnar, I'm glad to have you, and it would be great if you can introduce yourself quickly.
Yeah, Harald, thanks very much. First of all, to invite me to this webinar. I'm glad to talk a little bit about our joint experiences on that one. Shortly introduce myself. My name is Gunnar Büchter. I'm responsible for the sustainability part at our company, and on top of it, which I think is a perfect combination, I'm as well leading the procurement teams in Europe and North America for our interiors business. So therefore, I think two hats I'm wearing, and I think that's perfect as well for implementing sustainability in the supply chain.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at the agenda of today. So we will start out by looking at the supply chain sustainability efforts and strategy at Yanfeng today, and also the timeline of how the collaboration between Prewave and Yanfeng developed. We will then, in the second part, dive a bit deeper on the changes that were now brought by the Omnibus Package, and then reflect on what exactly that means for the supply chain sustainability strategy at Yanfeng specifically going forward. And of course, we will end with an audience Q&A. You will have a Q&A section that you can ask us questions here in Zoom in the webinar. You can already do this during the webinar. If it makes sense, we might pick one or two questions already during the webinar, but certainly we'll answer them at the end. The slides for today's webinar, as well as a recording, will be sent to everybody that registered for the webinar. With that, I want to hand over to Gunnar to lead us into the first part of today's webinar and give a quick introduction on Yanfeng, the company, but also sustainability strategy at Yanfeng today. So Gunnar, over to you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, Yanfeng, for those of you who do not know, so we are quite big company in the global automotive sector, ranked 15th, between 15 to 18 billion, depends on how you see it, consolidated, unconsolidated, 57,000 employees and 220 sites. So we actually have been founded in 36 in Shanghai, and then Yanfeng merged as well the interior business from Johnson Controls in the year 2015. So therefore as well, that was a big step in globalization as well. And meanwhile, there's several areas we are working in, which I want to show you on the next slide. So you see our product line. So we are one of our biggest product lines is automotive interiors. So door panel, dashboards, consoles. Then we are in the seating situation, and we as well have started to globalize the safety sector. So airbags, passenger airbags, steering wheels, airbags for seats and those things. Integration of cockpit electronics, and as well we have sections where we do door modules and exterior. So then we have a couple of platform parts, and those which are in the automotive sector, so like motors, mechanisms, displays, ECUs, and we integrate as well those things. So for, let's say, the future of the interiors, maybe in the future we have self-driving cars, then you need to have different safety activities on the seat side when you are not belted. The combination between interiors and safety is nice because you have dashboards where you have your airbags in, smart steering wheels, integration of electronics in your steering wheels, and then the door systems, which can as well combine a lot of the other things. Yeah, so this is the portfolio we are working in. So actually pretty global in all 3 big regions. Yeah, so next page, please.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we are, as many of you are, trying to be very transparent in what we do. So we support the United Nations Global Compact. We now, meanwhile, for the 4th year, we are disclosing in CDP. We have signed up for our interiors business, the SBTI, science-based target, with a short-term target for 2030. And we are part of the Responsible Supply Chain Initiative. We're going to talk later about these things as well. EcoVadis and SAQ, I mean, kind of the standards. We're pretty proud to be A- in CDP on the interiors part for almost now 4 years. And then we've improved as well our EcoVadis rating for the whole company to silver, which was a big effort for us, but as a global company, but I think we were happy to have that. It's a very small team. We're doing that globally, but yeah, it's a very good team. Next page. Good.
Yeah, I think gonna be seeing you're doing, getting a bit of feedback that you're doing a lot in supply chain sustainability, and Prewave and Yanfeng started working together. I think it was 2020, and we will also look a bit into the history. But I think when we look at this sustainability strategy and something that you will also now show us a bit more of, it's also, of course, relevant to understand what are actually the drivers behind that strategy. Why are you implementing these sustainability measures? Why are you aiming to realize those targets that you're setting in carbon footprint, in transparency in the supply chain? And here I think it's about requirements that back in 2020, there were no regulations around these requirements, but these requirements are also coming from other areas. And maybe you can reflect a little bit on these requirements and what is really driving the sustainability at Yanfeng.
Yeah. So first of all, when I started back in, let's say, 2020, 21, 22, so this topic wasn't very prominent, and even for a Chinese company, not really. I mean, Europe was always forward going on that topic, and I had to translate, I think, a little bit requirements as well. Firstly, coming as well from our bigger customers, right? So the whole story started with, my dear Mr. Supplier, you need to fill in CDP, and please do that by X date, and then we started to learn what it is all about. Whoever started to fill in those questionnaires, when you do it the first time, you're asking yourself, okay, so where is that coming from? Who is responsible? Who can give me that information? This is how we started. It actually started with customer requirements, and it was not regulatory requirements. And let's say we then started from that angle, and then much later, I mean, there were more the European requirements coming up. What do we need to do? The German Supply Chain Act, and as well regulations. So I would say for us, it was more customer driven, and then it developed as well into kind of a requirement for the company, because I mean, one other part is as well motivation of people internally. So I think young generation is for the young generation is super important as well to understand, okay, what are you doing for sustainability? Do we want to work for a company in automotive which is focusing on that or not focusing on that? I think that's a big topic as well. I mean, beside all the regulatory discussions which we will touch later on. Yeah.
Maybe one follow-up question here. So you are obviously working with global OEMs, and these regulations are heavily driven by the European Green Deal, and but if you reflect on your customer base, the North American, the Chinese OEMs, the European, are the standards and requirements similar across them, or how has this changed over time?
No, I don't feel it's similar. It's very, very different. I think it depends on the customers who who want to put themselves as the forerunner on certain things. I would believe that let's say customers which are more playing at the high end want as well to make sure that the image of these companies is well maintained. And some are the very front runners. They use sustainability as a marketing instrument or as a corporate culture instrument. And then there's companies, and it depends. Maybe if you go to the mid-level, which need to do that, but maybe they don't have a focus in terms of the marketing itself. So I think the regulations, the requirements with the OEMs, meanwhile, are similar, but there are front runners and there are people who are fast followers. Let's put it like that. Yeah.
So yeah, please tell us a bit more about sustainability strategy and how it's integrated at Yanfeng.
Yeah, so when we started, actually, you like every company, you need to put yourself in an environment. Okay, what do we want to do? So we started to understand. Okay, what do we want to support? Right, the E, the S, and the G. I mean, we often just talk about the E. So from a strategic alignment, we needed to understand. Okay, so customer requirements. So first of all, think about what is our requirements, and we already talked about it. It's customer requirements, it's internal requirements, it's external requirements, it's regulatory. So out of that, you have a cake, and then you would need to understand, okay, with the needs and as well the investments you have, what do you want to achieve? So you set yourself targets in terms of carbon. You set yourselves targets as well about implementation of certain technologies, products to support the overall targets. You make sure that your long-standing ideas for social and governance are implemented in the right way. So this is the top strategic alignments, which in many cases, like it is in automotive, are following the customer needs. But as well, you need to understand. Okay, so is it the same pace in all of the regions, which actually is not? It would be nice if it would be, but it's not. And we see that, let's say, in the different view of topics in North America, in Europe, and in China, right? So there's I think you need to differentiate as well between regions. And then so we founded a couple of governance ideas. So how do we implement operationally? So we have our sustainability council where all the functions and the different regions are part of it. We exchange what went well, where do we need to improve, and then it's more a hands-on discussion. And then those people out of the regions, they try to implement within the boundaries and the targets. So we set ourselves pretty clear, easy targets, whatever, I don't know. How many solar panels in plants do we want to implement? What is the amount of recycled material we want to implement in the year? What's the amount of, I don't know, carbon we want to reduce? And so those things. But I would always say, don't boil the ocean. So you need to have a couple of very things which you can measure as well. So that's very difficult sometimes in ESG. How do you measure that, right? So, and then organizational culture. We set up a 8-course training, a digital one. So where the whole the overall company can participate. Everybody above plant means staff and project management and procurement and human resources, so that we have the same mindset. And then we integrated as well kind of sustainability sessions where people could exchange as well their stories, what went right. I mean, when there was a good project, so we did that, I don't know, every 3 to 4 months, maybe twice a year, so that yeah, people as well can see live examples. Yeah. So next page. Okay, so talking a little bit about, I mean, and this is more about the German Supply Chain Act or the CSDDD. So as an example, how actively we implemented those things. So you see the cycle. So identification of critical suppliers, and that's very specific now for, let's say, the procurement function. So where do I identify my suppliers? So obviously you need to have some help here. So the help is coming from Prewave in this case. And then you identify your critical suppliers. As I told you, that we are part of the Responsible Supply Chain Initiative. This is OEMs and first tiers, which are actually created together a audit scheme, which everybody uses the same. So our critical suppliers, then we're gonna audit. It can be done externally or it can be done internally. We at YF decided that we wanted to have the training and the exams done. So we have around 10 auditors meanwhile globally, and they go out to the critical suppliers and do the due diligence on the RCI audit. So, and then you have a result, and then you can trace it again through Prewave as well if something with the critical suppliers is happening. And actually we have then you have an action plan as well. So our supply development people, they go out to the supply base, and they actually, in the social compliance audit, the RCI audit, they actually try to understand very much in detail 2 days where we have a problem and where it's probably needed to go another second time. And then exactly those people will then be as well the help for continuous improvement. And then we can measure through Prewave if everything's fine so far. So that's how we measure. That's how we are able then as well to make sure that we have our critical supplies under control, but we have digital help to monitor those things. And we have one audit scheme which helps us, which as well is aligned with our customers, so that we don't do that again and again. So I think that's a little bit an example how you can do it to make sure that you comply to the German Supply Chain Act, and you comply as well, in most of the cases, I would say, to the CSDDD. Yeah.
Perfect. And so now we want to go into a bit of a view on a timeline perspective. So how did your initiatives around supply chain sustainability develop over time? Also the collaboration with Prewave and your engagement with CDP or the RCI, and really driven by these general requirements. And for that, we will have now a timeline view. And Gunnar, maybe you can give us a bit of a insight into how the sustainability strategy and initiatives developed over time.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things I already touched on, right? So started in 2021 when having the first rating from CDP, try to understand as well the gaps, because I think when you start first, you identify very, very shortly that you have a lot of gaps, and then you need to try to understand how do we fill these gaps? What do we need to do from an organizational point of view? And quickly you will have a lot of questions to a lot of functions, and they need to report, and then you find out, okay, so what is missing? And then 2021 was, I would say, one trigger, and we will talk later about that, was as well the requirements on transparency in leather, and a big study, which I think we talk later on, right? So, and I mentioned the RCI implementation of the audit scheme, and for us, what was in terms of carbon management was very intensive to really understand what do we need to do when we sign up science-based targets. It's very easy to sign up for something which happens then in 2050, but the science-based target validation is a little more detail. So you need to make sure that, and this is as well touching the supply chain area. So all this CPOs. So when do you reduce? When are you able to reduce what by when? Because SBTI gives you a corridor, typically until 2030, 2040, 2050, depends on what you sign up. So that was a very, very intense discussion. And then, I mean, needless to say that everybody of us have renewable energy goals. And then for us, for example, I mean, if we talk about scope 1 and 2, so means the electricity you buy and as well the everything which goes out of your chimney. So we want to be scope 1 and 2 net zero in 2030. So that, and then you have your timeline. So that's actually the holistic approach on how we tackle these general requirements.
And now maybe to deep dive a bit on this topic of transparency in leather, because this is actually a very good example of how these requirements are developing over time, and the need for transparency in the deeper supply chain is really nothing new. So very early after we started working with Yanfeng, and obviously back then looking at the tier 1 suppliers, this report, which was co-authored by the Rainforest Foundation Norway and a German NGO, I believe, kind of linking cattle farming and the deforestation within South America to leather that's used in car seat, and let's say also linking that to some of the interior producers, including Yanfeng, and that sort of triggered then at this early stage in 2021, first of all, the realization for us at Prewave that we are really talking here about supply chain challenges. It's not just a tier 1 supplier problem. This also triggered then us to really invest and develop our tier N solution. And it also led to then a first project of mapping these supply chains together and bringing the transparency that was also required then by the OEMs based on that report. But yeah, maybe Gunnar, you also want to say a few things about the backstory.
Yeah, I remember very well because I think we were talking about that very early in 21, 22 as well. And then I think it was even before the German Supply Chain Act, right? So,
Yeah.
So then I had this report. I don't know from what area that was very prominent in the automotive area, because that was a 80 pages report which showed us. So actually, this Norwegian Rainforest Foundation, they went to the they went down to the cattle farms and they could show with pictures what area has been changed to cattle areas where before it was rainforest. And it was not only showing that this happened, they combined this with actually the producers of seats and door panels. So they had, so if you had an area where it was a problem, it was directly linked to a first tier or an OEM, right? So it was not, and that was very, very difficult because it was out in the press, and I don't know what. So luckily, we as a company, we've not been mentioned there, but we could have been mentioned because so we all use quite the same supply base, but you could trace this. There was an Excel list, and therefore there was an Excel list saying, okay, so this OEM, this first tier, this leather supplier, this slaughterhouse. So therefore we thought, wow, okay, so if this is not possible, I think we need this transparency. How could you ever have this? And there's a lot of work. So what can we do? And then I think we had the discussion, Harald, right? So, okay, I mean, you have a system. You can somehow share this. I mean, you can even think about having import data into your system, which is you can just have out of the market, and then you can trace it. And then that was kind of the foundation of us as well, mapping our suppliers when we did know this. And so the suppliers, so that we would really understand where we have a risk or not, right? Because at that time being, everybody was asking, oh, so where are the cows for my leather coming from? Please tell me they are not coming from Brazil. So that was the first question, because that was the result out of that report, which was actually really in the press. And I remember that a lot of people had to explain a lot of things there. So therefore that started, and that gave us a good input to to develop and to think about it. Yeah.
And of course, today with the deforestation regulation, we have exactly those questions again. So these things can move in.
Yeah, I think that probably the deforestation regulation, I mean, those kind of NGO reports path the way to these regulations, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe you can tell us a bit what you're currently doing to.
Yeah. Actually, I think when sourcing, let's say, when I start, let's say, from number four, this is actually us, right? So we integrate leather parts, cut leather parts into our interiors, and then typically it could be that we are sourcing this, or the OEM will give us a direction at what supplier this will be done, and then actually it could be we could cut by ourselves, or the partner would cut for ourselves, but then the whole supply chain from 1 to 3 is segmented as well in different areas. So I mean, sometimes there's people just cutting for you, and then it depends, and then you have the leather processing, right? So which actually you already have the hide from the slaughterhouse, and then you have tanning, fishing, finishing, and the other processes to transform a raw hide into a leather, which is actually this is a process which you need to focus as well in terms of water, environment, and those things, because you work with chemicals. I mean, there's as well labor laws you need to think about, and which you might need to audit, and then the question is, okay, where are the raw hides coming from? So where's the slaughterhouse? Where's the origin? So that you have the question in terms of, okay, so where exactly is it, right? So that's kind of the process. If you go to the next page. So when we do the leather sourcing, obviously we have to ensure that the ethical and sustainable sourcing is being engaged. So we do have a risk assessment and a mapping of the leather supply. So we already, when we do so, we're going to ask those questions. Okay, where's the cow coming from, and so and how do you do the processing then? And we need to make sure as well that, I mean, in most of the cases, meanwhile, as well, people are certified, and and it's as well traceable from where they come, and depends on the country you are working in. But and we ask those suppliers for sure as well to be part of the Prewave mapping, so that we have this situation. And then I mean, all in all, now with the EU directive as well, we look for sure as well on the environmental risks, deforestation, and those things, so that everything's fine. I mean, some of the OEMs as well, they have some even more in-depth requirements, and we have our experts on that, both on the supply development as well on the commodity level, so that we make sure that so we comply to all the regulations, and our suppliers exactly know what is the requirement.
And then I think as we keep telling the story, and this is also something that was really a part of our collaboration from the very beginning, was this understanding of, it's not just about sustainability, but it's also about the synergies of implementing processes that can make also supply chains more resilient, and using the insights into supplier risk. Yes, to understand the environment and social and governance risks, but also to understand financial risks and geopolitical risks. And so really that is something that has been part of the collaboration from the very beginning. And if we now look at that from the timeline perspective, also back in 2021 when our collaboration started, yes, it was about having a view on the sustainability topics, but it was also alongside a view on implementation of risk management. So monitoring suppliers on financial stress, general procurement risks, even leading now into recently looking into tariff exposures and topics that have a more clear also resilience and business continuity impact. But yeah, maybe Gunnar, you want to speak a little?
Yeah, basically, it has all the ingredients of. So why did we start with risk? We've been the automotive have been hit hard by after 2008, 2010. We had a lot of exposure after the crisis. A lot of suppliers went bankrupt, and we had a lot of emergency activities, which I think a lot of people in automotive, but not only limited to automotive, and we were actually searching as well for some digital help on that topic. How can we go from a reactive mode in terms of supplier management, specifically when it is about financial risk, but not only limited, to a reactive mode? And let's say it's all about transparency, because when a company struggles and the financials are going south, then there's always a reason, right? So, and then we thought, okay, so asking once a year how the status is at the financials from our supplier is not enough. So you would need to do more, because if you want to be preventive, so then you need to know before. So therefore, I think we met each other somehow, and you had solutions for this, and then we integrated these, and so beside the financial rating discussions, we now have a tool where we see those things coming. I mean, it's always like when you have an alert in a system which automatically pops up for one of your suppliers, which you already know it's financially difficult, and then there is a problem, a quality problem, a social problem, something happens at the site that gives you more indication that you would need to do something, and therefore, I mean, this helped us a lot, right? So therefore, it's about transparency in a lot of different areas of a supplier, which then gives you good understanding about how's the supplier doing, and it covers it a lot. So therefore that was kind of a starting point. And I think when you start to have a vehicle like this, we discussed a lot, what can you do with that? How can you get some more ideas about these things? And along the last years, there have been a lot of things like gas, like flooding, like tariffs. Yeah, so this is always giving you headaches in supply chain and procurement, because the continuity is not giving, right? And who's able to trigger to make sure that supply is working? This is actually the company or the department who can anticipate what's happening, right? It's not always possible, but if you have a couple of pre-warning activities like we have here with Prewave, and financial systems in the background we have, and that gives us a possibility to have a plan and in most of the cases we have just we were able as well to detect these risks and have some good plan as well, maybe to resource from one supplier to the other supplier early enough when before things are happening.
And then really, and this was then maybe 2022, 2023, when the German Supply Chain Act really was being enacted. And of course now we have more regulations upcoming. But if you look at the timeline, I think this was really something that also during the collaboration it came a bit at a later point. Yeah? So I think Gunnar, we started working on the German Supply Chain Act implementation in 2022. And yeah, today I think there's obviously EUDR currently on the table, but CSDDD, CSRD upcoming. But yeah, I think just putting into context that many things were put into place and then the regulation sort of came as an additional requirement, as a now regulatory requirement on top. Yeah. And with that, I think we can move into the next part, which is the omnibus changes. So these regulations, maybe the German Supply Chain Act a bit put aside as it relates to the EU Omnibus, have now been impacted. They have now been changed. So on the 26th of February, the Omnibus 1 package on sustainability simplification was announced. And I believe actually this week, the stop the clock vote on the timeline shifts is being enacted. And this is really touching the CSRD, the CSDDD primarily in terms of the timelines and scopes. Other regulations such as deforestation, battery regulation, forced labor regulation are currently not touched by any omnibus. Also the upcoming ones. So the main impact was really the timeline shift, and we had on the CSRD, if we can start there, these three waves. The first wave, which has also remained in place, so that is not changed. These are the companies that were already required to report under the NFRD. They still need to file the report in 2025 for the fiscal year 2024, so that is remaining unchanged. But however, what has changed are the subsequent wave 2 and wave 3, with the wave 3 really essentially eliminated because the thresholds have also been raised to companies with more than 1,000 employees, really in line now also with the CSDDD. And let's say what has, and I believe Gunnar, you would have been in this wave 2, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Reporting next year on this year. This has now been moved by 2 years as it comes to the CSRD. So in the case of Yanfeng, the report will be due in 2028 for the fiscal year 2027. And a similar impact on the CSDDD, where it would have started applying in 2027. This has now been moved and aligned with the second wave. So starting with 2028, companies with more than 3,000 employees and more than 900 million euros in turnover will also need to be compliant to the CSDDD. So these are some timeline shifts, and we have here also a summary, also significantly impacting the amount of companies that are now covered by the CSRD and CSDDD, actually unchanged in the amount of companies, but specifically the CSRD, a scope reduction of around 80%, really focusing in on the large enterprises. And I think now we want to take a bit of a deeper look also on the supply chain sustainability requirements and how they have been impacted. And here we want to now look into the CSDDD. And before we do that, and talk about some of the major changes that have been proposed. So just to be clear, the delay on the timeline, that is the stop the clock initiative, and that is enacted this week. On the actual contents that we will now discuss, this has been a proposal by the Commission, but this will still be enacted after a standard legislative process, also with the Parliament and the Council. So we can still maybe expect here at least half a year of legislative process within the EU. But the current proposal impacts, let's say, specifically the risk assessment around the CSDDD. And to understand how it impacts the risk assessment, we quickly want to reflect on how this is actually structured. So the CSDDD risk assessment really works in, let's say, two broad parts. This is Article 8.2a and Article 8.2b. 2a is the risk mapping. We at Prewave call it also scoping, as it's called in the OECD guidelines. Really, this is kind of a general exercise of identifying broad areas of risk within the supply chain, not yet looking at individual suppliers, as it's, for instance, necessary with the German Supply Chain Act, but really broadly saying certain categories, commodities, or countries, those we see in scope for areas of risk. And then going into the in-depth assessment. So then, let's say, screening suppliers, assessing suppliers in depth in the second step. And really along these lines, these are some of the major changes that were also proposed. Again, not yet enacted, but proposed. In that before Omnibus, during this kind of risk mapping step, so this first step, there were really no particular guidelines or restrictions on how information from the suppliers was supposed to be gathered. Now, after Omnibus, so with these Omnibus proposals, there's actually a requirement that during this risk mapping part, there should not be any direct information gathering from business partners, so suppliers with less than 500 employees. Really, let's say a proposal to also safeguard the SME suppliers from significant requests from their customers. But again, this applies just to the risk mapping part. And then on the in-depth assessments, here the, let's say, main change was that the indirect business partners, which we call the Tier N suppliers, are only supposed to be assessed in case there exists plausible information that there really are adverse impacts, we could also say risks, within those supply chains. So let's say a similar concept than we have in the German Supply Chain Act, the substantiated knowledge. So to just reflect on that with the previous funnel slide. So that means in this first step here, during the information gathering, you really should not reach out to business partners with less than 500 employees, which, to be honest, is anyway the approach we are recommending to do this risk assessment based on a, let's say, commodity, industry, country risk perspective for both the Tier 1 and the Tier N supply chain. During the in-depth assessment, this information gathering, however, using screening process, if needed, also questionnaires, is actually allowed by the current draft. Interestingly enough, then the assessment of the risks in the deeper supply chain, so this is now the second row here, on inclusion of business partners. Within this risk mapping step, you're actually still supposed to assess risks broadly in the deeper supply chain, so also the Tier N part, but are then supposed to really assess these risks in depth only in case of plausible information. And I think this is really, of course, a part which will be heavily discussed and assessed going forward. But I think if you reflect on what is plausible information, I think linking here back to also this NGO report on deforestation and risks in around deforestation in, for instance, the leather supply chain, is really a very good example for these types of reports on clearly known risks in certain supply chains. And this could really be mentioned for many risk supply chains. Is it textiles or are it certain maybe battery and metal raw materials, but maybe also leather? These are known areas of risk, and such reports, but also grievance reports that your company has received, media reports, and potentially even the flagging of material risks in the CSRD can constitute the need to also look into the deeper supply chain. And again, to connect the dots here, this is exactly what we did already in 2021 is to use these reports and to use this information as a starting point to really engage with the deeper supply chain at Yanfeng. And so to kind of wrap up and to round off here the webinar, so Gunnar, and this is now my question back to you. We have discussed about the journey and the timelines and how sustainability strategy at Yanfeng has evolved based on, let's say, these requirements, so the general customer requirements, also the synergies with resilience, and then also the regulatory requirements. And now CSDDD and CSRD, for you having moved by 2 years, what does this change for you? Does it change anything? It certainly does on the CSRD implementation.
Yes, for sure it does, but it does not from a concept point of view. It does change the amount of effort, let's say, to be started to make sure that the something which will be audited later on, CSRD, will be done because it's very detailed. It's very detailed by plans. It's a lot of questions. Meanwhile, it will not be so much questions anymore because they changed it. But I think it changed. It is changing actually the amount of work at the moment for the time being, because we should have been then prepared to do so in the next year for this year. So that's a little bit from a from an effort point of view, that this is actually not so much. But it does not change the, let's say, general requirements, because the requirements from the customers, the general requirements you give to yourself. So for example, I don't know, we launched an internal requirement for sustainable procurement guideline. So what is important for us? It does not change anything on our partner code of conduct, the way we want to work with our supply base. It doesn't change anything about the general requirements in the very difficult commodities, which you understand, which are critical. It doesn't change anything to our audit requirements when we identify suppliers to be critical based on our risk analysis according to the German Supply Chain Act. So many things are not changed, and it depends on so how important it is for your company, also whether this is an important topic, how many self-driven targets you have. So therefore, if you feel that this is a competitive advantage as well, or I mean that will then not change anything. From an impact of how much work you need to invest in answering those questions, I think we all need to ask the questions with all the requirements which we have, the different audits to be answered, the different CDP, NQC, and EcoVadis questions which a company needs to answer. I think there will be a time, and maybe this is as well, when the CSRD is implemented, and maybe as well that will be much more easy because you have one area you can touch on, and hopefully the questions which will be asked by the different NGOs can be reduced for everybody. So that's I don't know, that's my dream, if you can refer. And some of them have already been agreed that between CDP and GRI there's some collaboration. So I think it's all a good preparation, and maybe CSRD later on helps us as well to have some more standardized approach in the field of sustainability. Yeah, so that's how I would see it, right? So, but for sure, for those ones which are just need to report out then in 28, and there's some work you don't need to do at the moment, which but then it comes later in 27, right? That's how I would see it.
Yeah. And very practically speaking, from, let's say, the I'm sure you had a CSRD project in place, trying to set up the data gathering and work on all of the different streams that are necessary. Is this something that's now on hold? Is this something you welcome to say, I can?
Yeah, we had activities, and we did know, and we had some plans. So yeah, and then you have different priorities. So then you shift some of them, right? If it's not due. So that's where we are at the moment. So yeah, a good preparation for, I think, many of the people listening here. A good preparation is always GRI, and many of the companies are already doing GRI. So the step from GRI to CSRD isn't that big. Not knowing what CSRD is really, for those companies already done that. But I think it's, as we understood, it's a good combination. We did that the last year just to prepare ourselves for that one. But yeah, that's how I would see it. Yeah.
And so from your perspective, from the requirements, does this mean the pressure is now a little bit reduced, or do you still have some, let's say, significant topics of priority that are still heading?
For us internally, there are specific requirements which doesn't go away. If you commit to reduce carbon footprint or to reduce scope 1 and 2 until a certain timeline, that doesn't go away. If you commit to your customers to reduce carbon footprint for components you deliver to your customers, that doesn't go away. So you need to implement that. So you need to find solutions in engineering and production to comply to it, because this is what you commit to your customers, and then that helps as well then subsequently to reduce. So those requirements, they do not go away. Yeah. So for sure not.
Mm-hmm. All right, and I think with that we can happily open up the Q&A. So again, to remind everybody, we have already a few questions, but within the Q&A section of Zoom, feel free to send us your questions to me or Gunnar. Maybe picking up a question that's already there. So the supply chain mapping with tools like Prewave, using the various data sources. Is this sufficient for you, and is this the only thing you're doing? Grievance needs to be considered as well. Yeah, basically, is this sufficient from your perspective, or just a starting point, essentially?
Yeah, no, it's not, and I would refer to the process which we've installed. It can only be a starting point, and it can be a part of the process. So I think everybody then need to understand how this kind of risk process should be designed in the different companies. So you first of all need this mapping. It's a help, and then if there's some alerts along the supply chain, that can help you as well. But if you identify a specific commodity or a specific country as being very difficult or risky, so then you identify the suppliers, the direct suppliers, and then the mapping, or the, let's say, Prewave mapping is not enough. So you would need to go out and audit your suppliers if you identify them as critical. And then if you audit your suppliers, then you automatically in this, I mean, what we do, the RCI audit, you will ask a lot of questions of the supply chain as well. So that's very intensive. So clear answer. It can help in identifying risky suppliers as in the first step, because it has some good ideas and some good filters which you can put on your thousands of suppliers. But once you identify them, then you need to take action if those suppliers are in the red zone, and after the audit, you will have a report, and then there need to be a follow-up, and then a digital system like Prewave can just help to focus on those critical suppliers as well. So because you cannot, I mean, you cannot control everything manually somehow, and you cannot call your critical suppliers every week. So other than that, I mean, so let's say the AI tool helps you to do so. Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. Maybe one more question. I think, Gunnar, you were in the unique position to be really set up in a very global organization, right? With both a very heavy US footprint, China footprint, but also European footprint. How is the kind of view from the, let's say, non-European parts of your organization on what's happening in Europe currently? Is it perceived as, let's say, maybe a good thing that now, let's say, the regulatory winds have changed a bit? Is there a level of maybe this is quite chaotic, you know, and then maybe not the stable regulatory environment that's to be expected or in Europe? It would be interesting to get maybe your insights on the kind of global perspective on what's happening in Europe.
I think it's a good question because, yeah, so I think when doing sustainability at a global company and sitting in Europe, I learned very fast that you need, so you would need to understand as well the different, so first of all, the regulations are regulations, so you need to comply to them, but there's a different speed on initiatives in a company in different regions, and you need always to listen to the regions. What is the requirements as well from the customer? If you then would talk to the customers in the US, specifically meanwhile, so you would maybe have different requirements, and there's different topics you need to address rather than doing it in Europe or even in China, right? So sometimes you always need to be up to speed as well what people are regulating, and it's not the same speed. Sometimes there's a question of investment. So for what do you want to invest in certain activities, and it's, you need to anticipate a different speed as well in different regions. That's my view, and it's very broadly said. There's some guidelines everybody need to follow, but there's as well some, if it's about speed, how fast do we want to implement certain things, and there's a difference between the regions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's a question on audit standards. I think, Gunnar, you mentioned, of course, your involvement in the RSCI.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I would be able to comment on the question of Stefan. So yes, there are different standards. So basically, the RSCI standards, or the Responsible Supply Chain Initiative of the automotive and first-tier suppliers, it's based on the RBA scheme. So so we do have a couple of customers as well who use the RBA scheme, but luckily a lot of OEMs and first tiers are now following the RCI scheme, which actually is a great thing, because if you think about a supplier as a first tier, second tier, or third tier supplier, sometimes these suppliers work for the first tiers, or sometimes they work for the OEMs directly. So it would be it's always difficult for smaller companies as well to answer to different audit schemes. So a standardization is great. So RCI is based on RBA. I mean, for those ones which are more in detail. So Stefan, I guess you are. This was a big step for us as well. So if you do RCI, so you can do RBA as well. So our auditors, they know exactly what it is about. I don't know SMETA, for example, but okay, so I cannot be the expert in everything, but I hope that answers. Yeah. Then I think there's a different question on Supply Chain Act. We expect Supply Chain Act to be developed and aligned to the Omnibus Package as they develop. It's a good question. I don't know. I think the CSDDD has been changed to less requirements, to my understanding. And my understanding was as well that, so a big part of the CSDDD was as well to integrate the environmental part into this on CSDDD. Beside the German Supply Chain Act has that was not a requirement in the German Supply Chain Act but Harald, you're going to correct me, I mean. So I don't know. I think they want to make it more feasible for everybody, so they scaled it down. So for me, I make it a little more simple. I think when it comes into force, and what did you say, 27? Then I think everybody who is prepared for the German Supply Chain Act, I think has already a good preparation. I mean, that's my view, right? So
I think the current, obviously this is a political question, and I think if we've learned one thing over the last months is that this is a very fast-paced and changing environment, but this is of course subject to the current negotiations of the Grand Coalition in Germany. I think what is kind of an expectation is that at least the suspension of the reporting requirements, so the reporting requirements of the German Supply Chain Act are already suspended for I think about a year at this point, and it's very likely that this will continue and will be aligned with the CSRD. I think that's a clear expectation. Whether from a timeline perspective it will be further aligned, this is I think really unknown at this point. And we will see whether the German coalition even focus on the topic or they focus on the bigger fish they have to fry at this point.
Yeah.
Not sure, Gunnar, if you want to comment on the taxonomy question related.
To be honest, I would, but I think then I would need to ask my team. So I already learned quite a lot, but I mean that's not what I can. I mean I don't know. So maybe I don't know. That's what I cannot answer. Yeah.
No, and maybe last question from Max Schwenk. So RACI, is that something you are doing only with the first tiers or also with the tier N suppliers?
No, actually, we do RACI with our first tiers. So I mean, second tier in a row. We do not do that. I mean, we have not done that with the second step. I mean, we've not found that this is important yet. Sometimes the first tiers and the second tiers are mixed if you have raw material, but for the time being, we're just doing that with the first tiers out of our view. Yeah.
All right. We're already 5 minutes over. Gunnar, I want to thank you. I think for the very open and good conversation we had today, and also sharing kind of the insights and how you see kind of the impacts of these recent shifts and changes on what you're doing at Yanfeng. So yeah, very appreciated, Gunnar, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks very much for inviting me. It was a pleasure to discuss with you, like always, Harald. So yeah, and then thanks very much for those people who dialed in and took the time to listen to us. So yeah, very, very good. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So as said, we will send out the slides and the recording of the webinar afterwards. And yeah, with that, thank you and see you next time.